My name is Joanne St. Goddard, and I'm the Executive Director of the Recycling Council of Ontario and the Circular Innovations Council. And I am very pleased to have many guests from far afield today, and of course for you, our registrants, joining us. We've had incredible interest right across the country and from abroad in this circular procurement virtual series. And we're so happy to be able to continue to engage with you in advance of despite not being able to gather together and being in this virtual series as we all have experienced over the last few months. Just to give you a bit of background, if you've not been familiar with the Recycling Council of Ontario and the newly launched Circular Innovation Council, the RCO was created in 1978, and for the last 40 years, our interests and missions have stayed true to a focus of elimination of waste. We have seen change, particularly over the last few years, in the conversation expanding to more looking at fulsome production consumption cycles, as well as end-of-life management. And as a member-based organization, we are very privileged to collaborate with our members who represent the entire value and supply chain, as well as both public and private sector organizations. This gives us a very unique perspective as it relates to competing priorities and interests. Through that lens, we've acquired significant insight into motivations and can say that with certainty that the appetite for greater resource efficiency in public and private sectors has never been as strong as it is today. Among these consumption statistics, the share of greenhouse gas emissions generated by cities in particular is as high as 80%. And with increasing populations, particularly in the West, and growing high densities, cities represent 50% of our global waste generation. Circular procurement affords us the opportunity to address environmental, economic, and social outcomes directly. And we will see within our presentations today in communities around the world. The increasing interest in circular procurement, particularly here in Canada, begs the question, how do we as a non-for-profit organization come to champion circular procurement, supporting the public sector as a priority and in particular, and encouraging vendors and suppliers to respond, not only as a lever to eliminate waste, but to expand focus and shift an entire system of consumption from linear, take, make, and dispose to a circular economic model that is regenerative, resilient, and low carbon. In 2018, or in 2008 rather, we launched Take Back the Light, an innovative markets-based solution to recover valuable resources contained in mercury-containing lamps while reducing their environmental impact. We worked with buyers and suppliers of lamps to track and verify recycling service as a value add for customers incorporated into service agreements. And since the program's launch, have safely recycled 30 million plus fluorescent lamps across the province of Ontario. In doing so, we realized an effective marketplace focus should simultaneously be placed on service instead of products design, their use phase, and also end-of-life management, and of course, market dialogue. And as part of the program, we facilitated using bulk buying power to demand the best possible price for component recycling and recovery, with economic benefits of reducing costs, environmental benefits of increasing recycling, and of course, reducing toxic substance, and the social benefits of supporting more green jobs in the recycling sector, all of which took place through new market demands and in the absence of regulation. Learning from this success of Take Back the Light, our organizational priorities and activities align with the principles and business models that underpin the circular economy, which of course procurement plays such an important role. In October, we held a fascinating webinar on post-consumer recycled plastics that was a textbook example of demonstrating how creating the right demand, you can influence supply, which at the heart of it is what procurement can and should do to support and advance our circular economy. So as we continue to pursue and promote greater circularity, it brings us to the present moment and global recognition of the circular economy as an international annual World Circular Economy Forum, whose banner of official side event we are proud to host this series under. Our first webinar, Buying Change, featured Nick Xenos from the Government of Canada. Our federal government purchases more than $22 billion worth of goods and services every year, and through their procurement process have tremendous opportunity to create the right market demands. Simultaneously, it is also committed to a series of measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, including net zero emissions by 2050. And as the Executive Director of the Center of Greening Government, Nick shared with us the strategies and priorities that his office is taking to leverage procurement for a low carbon economy and meet a variety of other targets, including a reduction in plastic waste. We followed that up with Selling Change and showcased 3 leading organizations, HP Canada, Philips, and Wright Office, that embrace circular business models as an innovative service offering. Today, we showcase Identifying Opportunity and Ambition, which offers examples of progress and achievements that global cities have done to support circular outcomes using procurement as its driver. This aspect of circular procurement is important because opportunity and ambition is a key foundation of which circular procurement is based. It guides implementation and information for every step in the process. And it can also support a series of benefits in the 3 pillars of circularity. So now I will turn it over to our most anticipated presenters, who will take a deep dive with details on identifying opportunity and ambitions, with examples of how their initiatives support just some of those benefits by putting circular economy concepts into action. And I'm very excited to be joined by several individuals from various different parts of the globe and right here in Canada. Our first presenter is no stranger to our organization, and certainly is a name that we are all becoming familiar with as we move to implement circular procurement. And I have had the pleasure of introducing Dr. Mervyn Jones on several occasions. We first linked with Mervyn in 2017 as part of our first foray into leveraging procurement to drive waste elimination, and his easy approach and vast knowledge on sustainability is well sought after. Not only have we brought back Mervyn multiple times, including a lead role as part of our Circular Procurement Summit held in 2019, he has gone on to become an important and trusted partner with our new Circular Innovation Council to advance circular economy in communities across Canada, and in addition to his ongoing work across Europe. His professional highlights include technical support on the development and implementation of the United Nations 10-year Framework and Sustainable Public Procurement Programme, which is a global framework to enhance international cooperation to accelerate sustainable consumption and production globally. He's also pioneered and tested methodology to enable companies to transform their strategies to profitable, resilient, and more resource-efficient business models, and has helped develop the European Clothing Action Plan, which helps public procurers reach their environmental goals by using buying power to stimulate a circular approach to workwear. Today, Mervyn will introduce at a high level the importance of setting ambition, how spend analysis can identify opportunity, and the need for collaboration. And without further ado, I invite Dr. Jones to join us.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for that very, very generous introduction, and I hope I can live up to it. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today and to hopefully contributing to a good panel discussion at the end of the presentations. As Joanne said, my presentation is pretty much an overview. I will dive into a little bit of detail, but what I wanted to do was just to give a flavour and set the scene for the following presenters who will give far more detail. So when we talk about the circular economy and we talk about the procurement mechanisms as ways and levers of delivering circular economy, what I would like to do is to show how these aren't necessarily things that we think about in competition with sustainability and with the Sustainable Development Goals. They all contribute in what is hopefully a virtuous circle and a virtuous cycle of benefit and improvement, starting at the very bottom with circular tenders. Yeah, your most circular tender is the next one that you do. So if you haven't done anything, looking at the next tender, seeing what you can do next is a key message here. But circular procurement as a delivery mechanism contributes into national and indeed international policies. Obviously, being in the European Union, the circular economy package drives a lot of what the member states of Europe are actually trying to do in terms of circularity, moving their economies towards a more circular state, towards a more circular market, towards more circular products. And in doing that, they're contributing to Sustainable Development Goal, and in particular to Sustainable Development Goal 12.7, which is all about public procurement and sustainable procurement at that. And of course, that then contributes into the wider benefits of these 17 different goals that form the Sustainable Development Goals. And we hear lots of definitions of circular economy. We hear definitions of circular procurement and sustainable procurement and socially responsible procurement. These are all very, very similar. They're effectively an approach to delivering the sustainability goals that I've just talked about. The key thing for me when we talk about circular procurement and any definition of circular procurement is that it's about adopting a life cycle approach to thinking. That's not to say that you have to do a life cycle analysis on every tender, or you need to do life cycle costing at every different level, but it's about that initial thinking about the life cycle of the goods, the services, and the works that you're procuring, particularly in the public sector, but more widely in the private sector as well, within the supply chains. And it's by doing that life cycle thinking at the start that you realize the greatest potential for opportunities. And in that way, procurement is a system, it's a cycle. And that life cycle thinking, as you can see on screen, is helpful to the process, not just to look at what comes in and how you use it, but also what comes out. It may not be the same tender that you're using, but there's nothing that you purchase that you don't end up having to throw away in some shape or form. If you're not looking at how you're going to dispose of that at the end of life, then you're going to potentially pay more for your waste services than you would if you considered it at the outset. So circularity systems thinking is really, for me, just about good housekeeping. It's about good economics. And essentially being a good client, a circular procurement depends on policy translated into practice, as you can read on the screen. That's about connecting implementation to policy. It's about making practice deliver on what goals you've set. And the goals that are set in one country, in Europe, for example, may be slightly different goals from what's set in North America or what's set in Southeast Asia, or even in Africa or Latin America. It's a different dimension, it's a different agenda, but it's about translating the practice into the tenders that you do at the coalface. So if the procurement isn't linked to the policies, it's not delivering in the most effective way for the organization wherever it sits within the public or private sector. The circular procurement needs circular clients. And very often we talk about green products. And if we talk about circular products, you're not going to have a circular product unless you make it circular, unless the client, the user, the procurer, the consumer actually asks for it and then uses it in a way that actually it's intended for. So you can have the most circular chair or the most circular desk in the world, but if you're only using it for 9 months and then it gets broken and is not repaired and it's thrown out, it's not a particularly circular outcome. Now, there's a lot of different approaches, and really what I want to focus on is not so much a high level, but what you can do wherever you are in the globe. And there's a lot of guidance out there now. For example, this circular procurement in 8 steps that shows 8 different ways of working through how to become more circular. And you can download this book free of charge. It's written in English. It was first done in Dutch. But essentially, if you look at those first 5 elements, they're thinking about procurement in a strategic sense. They're looking about how to translate that ambition that you've got within your organization into what it is you actually need through procurement in terms of goods, services and works, the types of business models, and then the market collaboration. And then there's the follow-on steps, which are more about the tactical, the techniques around the tender procedures, around the criteria that you're using, the evaluation, how to measure and award, and then follow on in terms of contract management. But the key thing about getting started is really to look at what your contribution to a circular economy is going to look like. And as I've said, that differs from organization to organization. It can even differ from department to department. So looking at what circular economy means to you is the most effective way of then moving forward. Identifying how what you're doing, whether it's in your department, in your procurement function, in your organization, etc., is contributing to the policies that sit above you. And then it's about getting started, identifying a suitable product group. And I'll give you an example of that in a moment. But key to this, it's about collaboration, not just internally with the internal stakeholders, but externally as well. And as we're all finding over the course of the last year, it's around having to do something different. It's not something that we can do necessarily just by doing what we did before. And then finally, it's about measuring impact, looking at what you did. Did it make a difference? How can you communicate success? That's so important about making sure that what you're doing is then replicated again and again and again. And of course, we never get things right first time. So it's about learning from mistakes. So I mentioned collaboration very, very quickly. There are 3 types of collaboration that spring to my mind, at least. There's internal collaboration, and this is where we're looking at the procurement lifecycle approach. It means we have a wide variety, a wide number of internal stakeholders, all the way through from the finance, through senior management, through the procurement function itself, the users, the people who have to use the products that we purchase, and then right through to the people that then have to deal with the waste at the end of life within the organization. Another level of collaboration is with your peers, with other public sector bodies and customers. And of course, Joanne was talking about this in her introduction. One key way we all know about collaboration with our peers is actually to create a demand pull through better purchasing, through collaborative purchasing, purchasing together, but we get a better value for money from the marketplace. But of course, the one thing that we've got at the moment is a real recognition now about the role that we need to play in terms of procurement and public sector for the climate emergency. Joanne mentioned about the carbon dimension. Of course, the one thing that always seems to get left off is scope 3. We talk about scope 1, we talk about scope 2, but scope 3 emissions are those emissions that come through what we purchase. And scope 3 emissions can account for 70–80% of an organization's overall carbon footprint. And within scope 3 emissions, procurement accounts for 60–70% of scope 3. So if you're not addressing your carbon footprint through your procurement, you are missing a big trick. And of course, we've got the collective responses to COVID-19 recovery, recovery plans that are being instigated at a national level throughout the globe. It's also an opportunity. It's been a really testing and demanding time over the last 11 months, but we also have this opportunity to reset what we're doing and define a level of society, to define outcomes in a way that we haven't had that opportunity before. So, there's always negatives, but there are positives attached to it. And there's that, as I said, there's that cost approach to suppliers. The third level of collaboration is with the supply chain itself. And this isn't a mistake. I'm using exactly the same bullet points because everything that we are feeling as purchasers, as the public sector, the supply chain is feeling as well. And we all know that through seeing the different impacts that it has on different sectors in our national economies, as well as in the global supply chain. And this graphic you see in front of you is one from Accenture, who very much focus in terms of global supply chains, but you can see there that they're identifying in terms of their focus on a response to COVID-19, that it's about supply chain agility, supply chain collaboration, and it's about responsibility and sustainability. They're not either ors, they're all combined together. One feeds the other. And here's a very practical, very short, simple, practical example of what people can do. I'm using the example here from Cardiff in Wales, where they looked at their spend over 2019 and 2020, where how that spend actually related to the policies that they've got in place. As I said before, it's about making sure that your implementation matches your policy goals. The key bit here is actually where to start. And as you can see, within their spend areas, building services, transport and construction, that accounted for just over half the spend. Another key point to show here, again, just by analysing your spend very, very simply and very quickly, is that they spend over 10% on waste management. Again, if you're thinking about circular products and you're thinking about a circular approach, there is a real opportunity to reduce the amount that you end up spending on waste management, because waste management in effect is a sign of pretty inefficient procurement. But as you can see, you don't have to focus on too many spend areas, because the percentage values looking down this right-hand column diminish very, very rapidly. So it's about focusing on those where you can make the most impact. But what I would actually highlight is it's not just about the amount of spend that you have in any one particular category. It's about where those categories actually impact on the policies and the priorities that you've got in place. And in this example, Cardiff were looking at the priorities that they'd identified in their One Planet Cardiff, their carbon strategy, what they'd identified in their procurement strategies and their socially responsible procurement strategies. So they had 5 environmental priorities that came through all of those different strategy documents. They had 4 social priorities, and they had the economic ones as well. So when you look at the relationship between the spend and those different priorities, you can see, yes, infrastructure, waste management and construction came up quite highly on the left-hand side of the graph, but also there were some areas that maybe if you just looked at spend, you wouldn't necessarily think were areas where you could make a potential impact through circular procurement. So for example, food and catering, and indeed events. And it's about that relationship between how exposed you are to risk, what scope you have to do something, and what influence you have on the market. And balancing those out with the overall spend then can throw up and identify very simply and very quickly some categories that you may not have initially thought, just looking at the overall spend. This is not something that just Cardiff or has done. There's many cities around Europe have used this approach. They use the United Nations, the Marrakesh approach on prioritization analysis. In Canada, Toronto, the city of Toronto has done exactly the same as part of their circular procurement plan that they're actuating now. So it's not something that is unique to any one country, that's unique to any one region. It's something that can be done very, very simply and can be very specific in terms of the targeting within the public sector. And again, there's a whole raft of tools and guidance out there, but one I really wanted to highlight here that you can have as a takeaway is this guidance that has been written and is downloadable in English as well as in Dutch. It's been written by municipalities for municipalities, and it takes you through, as you can see on the right-hand side here, a very comprehensive 10-step plan with lots of information right down to criteria and how to evaluate and how also then to put weighting into your tenders so that you can actually make them more circular. So again, a fantastic resource, not the only resource, but something that you can take away. Talking of takeaways, I'll sum this up by saying the main takeaways here is using procurement as a strategic instrument that can deliver circular whole life benefits. It's not just about sourcing when we talk about procurement, but also how it's going to be used and how it's going to be disposed at end of life. And of course, circular procurement, like any procurement, involves collaboration. And if we're talking about a cycle, we're talking about a wide variety of stakeholders. Finally, measuring progress and recognizing success is a way to make sure that we take forward all the gains that we've done in particular tenders. So in summary, the most circular tender, in my opinion, is the next one you're going to do. Good luck with that, and I'll end there. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mervyn. I neglected to share with our participants the format. I wanted to dive right in because we have an added speaker today that we're very excited about, and I was conscious of time. But for everybody, just in terms of format, we're going to ask each speaker to go through their PowerPoint presentation. I might add a little question at the end of each individual presentation, and then we're going to open it up, obviously, to the 100 or so participants that we've got on the line as well. And hopefully we can get through at least some of them. And for those that of course don't have their questions read out loud or answered in particular, we're going to do our best to be able to answer them after the fact. So we'll be sending them out to each of the speakers and make sure that everybody gets the responses to grow knowledge. But just before we move on to Sinead, I just wanted to ask you, Mervyn, you mean kind of 2 points that resonated with me. And one was this whole idea of defining value and you know, the mechanism in terms of kind of trying to find an empirical value sometimes rests with things like LCAs, which can be very scary for folks. And certainly they think, you know, time consuming and cost. But it seems like there's this disconnect between, you know, procurement and buying power and using that as a tool to drive these broader public policy goals, especially in a government organization. And of course, that leads directly to your point about internal collaboration. Can you talk about how municipalities can start? Often it's either the public works department or the sustainability functions that are trying to get the attention of finance, procurement, legal, and just aren't able to do that, to make those connectivities. Can you talk about your experience of you know, where folks can start?
Yes, well, I can. I'm just trying to think on my feet because it's a really good question. I think initially I would say that there's 3 points of entry, but there's 360 degrees around the circle, so you could argue there's infinite points of entry. But I would say, you know, most of the organisations that I've worked with in the public sector and indeed in the private sector either focus on what is their carbon footprint. So there's the carbon dimension, or they focus on what is the social dimension in terms of socially responsible procurement. You know, what does this mean translate to in terms of job opportunities and employment, or, you know, equality, etc. So carbon and social dimensions are 2 dimensions, but the third dimension, the one that I think no organization is ever going to not listen to, is the cost dimension. You know, when we talk about circular procurement, when we talk about sustainable procurement, it really isn't about adding cost on, it's about how to actually take cost out of the operation. And that, for me, whether you're private sector or public sector, you know, particularly now the situation that we're in with the economy's response to COVID-19, you know, one of the key drivers is going to be how can we do more with less? How can we actually make value for money work in a way that, frankly, it's never had to work like it's going to have to work over the next couple of years. So by looking at that procurement hierarchy, looking at defining your need, looking at, do you need to buy new? Can you reuse? A good example of that is the amount of home working now that we've got, surplus in terms of office furniture in many, many office environments. Of course, there's now a new demand for furniture at home. Does that need to be new furniture for home workers, or can it be repurposed? It may not be able to be shoehorned straight into everybody's front room or into their bedroom, but it could be repurposed, and you may not necessarily have to buy new. So those are the areas where thinking about, do you need to buy new, can actually look to save money. And Scottish government, for example, and the Dutch government have made vast savings around furniture alone by looking at utilising what they already have rather than buying new.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. A whole other definition of how we perceive or define value. Excellent. Thanks for that, Mervyn. And we know that we're going to have more questions for you, but I'm going to move on to Miss Sinead Murphy, who was ported into us this morning. We were trying to secure her this last couple of weeks, and we were able to confirm her. So we're so thrilled to have her today. Sinead is a business account and project delivery manager at RAP. RAP, if you don't know, is an organization based in the UK that works with governments, businesses, and communities to deliver practical solutions to improve resource efficiency. Specifically, Sinead works on RAP's Public Sector Sustainable Procurement Support Programme that aims to drive demand in Wales for more sustainable products, including those with recycled content, and products for reuse through public sector procurement. She works with public sector organizations to identify opportunities for intervention and provides technical support to those teams responsible for procurement itself. Today, she'll discuss RAP's work on circular economy in Wales, their circular public procurement support program, and the specific policy context in Wales, and in particular, the most fascinating Well-Being of Future Generations Act, and how public procurement is seen as a key strategic tool to deliver well-being goals. Welcome, Sinead. Over to you.
Sorry, can you see?
We can't quite see your screen. I don't know if there's a screen sharing mechanism that has to happen, or.
Oh, sorry.
Be that.
Sorry, I have it now, I think.
Okay, great. There we go. Yep, we're on. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, 1 second. Oh, my screen. Sorry, can you see that now? It's coming
Sure.
up.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks, Joanne. I'm delighted to be here today and tell you a little bit about the work that we're doing in Wales. So RAP is an organisation, a not-for-profit organisation, and RAP stands for the Waste and Resources Action Programme. We're a UK-based organisation. We're often seen as a delivery body for government, but we do work with partners, governments, businesses, and other NGOs in over 20 countries around the globe. So our aim is to reduce waste and increase resource efficiency by working collaboratively across supply chains. And we focus our effort on 4 key areas, and these are food waste, plastic packaging, clothing and textiles, and resources and waste management. So how we deliver our work in RAP is through 4 main mechanisms or levers for change. And the first of these is policy and technical support. So we provide support to organisations, governments, public sector bodies to help them really implement waste prevention and recycling policies. We also work on what we call business voluntary agreements. And these voluntary agreements really bring together enough players across a sector or a supply chain to change the system. And we have business voluntary agreements in our clothing sector, in our food sector, and our plastic sector. We also have financial mechanisms, such as grants or loans, where organisations can apply for grants to develop capacity to overcome specific market failures. And the 4th lever is our citizen behaviour change work. So we deliver campaigns to help citizens prevent waste and recycle more. I've put the logo there of Love Food, Hate Waste, and some of you may be familiar with this logo. You may have seen it in Canada or in other countries around the world. And this is a highly successful campaign that's been developed by RAP, and we've licensed it to various partners around the globe, including Metro Vancouver in Canada. So just to explain how our approach works. So with regard to food, so if the reason we focus on food waste is because RAP's evidence has shown that if food waste were a country, it would be the 3rd biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. So we convened the sector through Quartal 2025, which is our voluntary agreement for the food and drink sector. And businesses representing 95% of the UK food retail market are signed up to the agreement. And they come together, they commit to collective targets, individual action plans, and to report and monitor progress. And these efforts are then underpinned by grant aid and also consumer behaviour change campaigns. And we know this approach works because since 2007, we've reduced food waste in the UK by more than 27%. And that represents a saving of over £4.6 billion and a greenhouse gas emissions reduction equivalent to taking 2.4 million cars off the road in the UK each year. So in addition to these UK initiatives, we have a programme of work in Wales that's specifically funded by Welsh Government. And the aim of that programme is to drive the transition to a circular economy and to meet zero waste. But before I go into detail on that programme, I think it was useful if I shared, if I shared a bit about the circular economy ambition in Wales and put it into the overall policy context. For those on the call that aren't that familiar with Wales, Wales is a small country, 3 million people, but it has a very big ambition in terms of circular economy. And that's underpinned by a unique piece of legislation in Wales called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act 2015. So Wales has been the first country in the world that has legislated to protect the interests of future generations. So public bodies are legally obliged to think about the long-term impact of their decisions. And they must work to achieve 7 wellbeing goals and follow 5 particular ways of working. So the wellbeing goals are there on the screen. They're about a prosperous Wales, a resilient Wales, a healthier Wales, a more equal Wales, a globally responsible Wales, a Wales of vibrant culture and thriving Welsh language, and a Wales of cohesive communities. The key thing about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is that public bodies are obliged to set and publish wellbeing objectives and report annually on progress to an independent Future Generations Commissioner. They also must report, and in this report, they need to evidence the contribution that public procurement is making to meeting the wellbeing objectives. So the Act really specifies that procurement is a key lever for promoting sustainable development. So the Wellbeing Act really is the overarching framework, but we also have specific policy priorities in Wales which hang off the Wellbeing Act. And again, it's where we see the golden thread of procurement as the mechanism to deliver on them. You see the foundational economy, decarbonisation, community benefits, social value and circular economy. And there's work going on in Wales being driven by the Wellbeing Act to ensure procurement is used strategically so that it can deliver on these multiple cross-cutting policy areas. So the one policy area I want to talk in more detail about today is the circular economy. And the Welsh Government has recently consulted on their circular economy strategy called Beyond Recycling. Final strategy is due out imminently, but we know from the draft that the ambition is likely to include achieving recycling rates of 70% by 2025 and of 100% by 2050, phasing out single-use plastics, making more efficient use of our food, prioritising the purchasing of wood, remanufactured and recycled content, and really taking full responsibility for our waste. So RAP will be a key delivery body for Welsh Government across many of the ambitions set out in Beyond Recycling. And we have a circular economy programme of work in Wales where our ambition really is to drive the supply and demand of recycled materials. So we have 4 key areas of work in that programme. And the first of those is the work we're doing on the Collaborative Change programme, where we provide strategic and technical support to local authorities to help them make their recycling targets. We also have a market development project where we support Welsh manufacturers to use recycled content in products that they can produce at commercial scale. So through this project, we are funding a number of demonstration trials, bringing products with higher levels of recycled content to market. So these generally relate to non-packaging products because Wales actually makes more packaging than it actually uses. And the packaging produced in Wales already has a recycled content of 50%. So we don't really see that there's a market failure here. Where we do see that there's more of a market failure is incorporating recycled content into other products. So this programme focuses on products such as medical products like sharps boxes, We have mortar tubs for the construction industry. We have bins for household. We have transport containers for liquids for transportation. So we have a number of products that we are funding trials to bring these products to market so that they can be produced in Wales and produced at scale. Complementing the Market Development Programme, we have our Circular Economy Fund, which is a £6.5 million fund that we administer on behalf of Welsh Government. So it's available to manufacturers of products with recycled content. And we've seen a really high uptake of the grant, and that really reassures us that there is a shift happening. So the final point is circular public procurement, which I'll focus on in a bit more detail now. So we know in Wales that we're good at collecting material for recycling. We're the third best recycling country in the world for household waste recycling. And we're also working really hard to improve the amount of products that are made from recycled content. But we know we'll never have a circular economy if we haven't got a market for the goods. So our support programme really aims to make the procurement of reused and remanufactured goods and products containing recycled content the new norm. And what we found when we speak to procurement staff, they're often time poor. They don't have the information they need to make the right decisions. And there's often a long tail of people buying and specifying products that are not procurement professionals. And by the time it lands on the procurement professional's desk, opportunities have been lost, decisions have already been made. So we really recognise that behaviours need to change, that culture needs to change, and we need to start at the top down. So with our support programme, we provide end-to-end procurement support, and they're focused on those levers of change. So policy and technical support, providing tools and guidance, and support for measuring and monitoring. So through our programme, we can provide support anywhere along the procurement process to drive demand for more sustainable products. So we offer one-to-one organisational support that could be strategic support, such as helping to embed sustainable procurement policy or sustainable procurement and policy or process. It could be analysing spend to identify opportunities for more sustainable procurement. But we can also support individual procurement exercises. So early on at the planning stage, engaging with suppliers to assess market capacity to supply more sustainable solutions, but also through to tender development and evaluation and contract management and monitoring. And monitoring is really key. We need to be able to understand the impact and the improvement that we're making. We also provide support across sectors or categories of spend where we know there's a knowledge gap or a barrier. So we're currently looking at construction as an example. We're looking to really address gaps around guidance around monitoring and reporting of recycled content and reuse in construction projects. And finally, we have tools that will promote behaviour change, such as case studies and guidance. So I just wanted to highlight a few examples of the support we provided. I think over the last year and a bit, we've done or are working on up to 50 different support projects with different public sector bodies across Wales. So the first example I just wanted to highlight is NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership. And for those not familiar, NHS is our national health service in the UK. And in Wales, Shared Services Partnership manage £1 billion of NHS spend in Wales. So we worked very closely with their Sustainable Development Group to embed circular economy principles within their Circular Procurement Code of Practice. And this Code of Practice really sets out how they will deliver their sustainability aims through their own activities, but also through their supply chain. So we also ran training on circular procurement, which was delivered across all the procurement teams and across all health boards in Wales. And this was really to cascade down the circular economy ambitions in their code of practice. We're continuing to work with shared services. We're currently undertaking a detailed analysis of their spend, doing a spend review to identify opportunities and develop the appropriate interventions for more sustainable procurement in their portfolio. The next example there is Cardiff Council. Mervyn has given you an overview of what we've done in Cardiff Council, so I won't dwell too long on it. But we undertook a spend review that Mervyn undertook on our behalf as part of our programme to identify where the opportunities lie and where the priorities lie in that procurement exit or in their spend, where they can address a lot of their sustainability policies. In addition to doing the spend review, we also provided training. We did 2 half-day workshops where they were really facilitated training workshops where we cascaded down the information that we found in the spend review, and also went to their procurement teams and went to their teams, their heads of departments and other people that were involved in the training, to really identify where the opportunities would lie for more circular procurement. We've also provided briefing to senior management on use of procurement as a strategic tool, and we're continuing to work on policy and on the One Planet Cardiff strategy with them. A couple of other examples. NRW, Natural Resources Wales, are responsible for forestry in Wales, and they were developing a framework to procure young trees to be planted in Wales over a long contract period of 9 years. They were really keen to explore ways to reduce single-use plastic in tree packaging and investigate, what the viable alternatives were. So we engaged really closely with the NRW teams to really understand the functionality and the disposal options. And we also undertook early market engagement to understand what sustainable alternatives were available on the market. So we helped them then frame their procurement criteria around the waste hierarchy, to really tell suppliers to set ambitions beyond recycling and explore new ways to cut down on plastic use as source. So we also provided recommendations for how NRW could challenge the supplier to innovate through the life of the contract period, because at the time, more sustainable alternatives to packaging weren't currently available, but we were aware through our market engagement work that there was a lot of work going on in this space. So we were able to work with them to really build into their contract how they could challenge their suppliers to provide more innovative solutions in the future. So the final example I want to mention is our work with Caerphilly County Borough Council, which is another local authority in Wales. And we supported them to help them reduce the impact of their single-use plastic in their catering supply chain. So firstly, we undertook a spend review of the category. So we reviewed the products, their catering, consumable, food and drink products, to understand what they were buying. We engaged with the council procurement, catering and waste management teams to really understand how the products were being procured, used and disposed of. We then went down to their suppliers to understand the product specifications and to understand what alternative products were available to supply, the suppliers were able to supply. And also, very importantly, we engaged with the waste contractors. So we really needed to understand their acceptance criteria for waste arisings, because the last thing we wanted to do was recommend that they change from one product to another, and that product couldn't be accommodated in their waste contractor. So if we were specifying compostables and their waste contractor couldn't take that, and it was actually going into the residual waste rather than a composting facility, well, then we were better off keeping with plastics that could be recycled. So based on the recommendations that we're able to provide, Caerphilly have significantly reduced the impact of single-use plastic in their catering supply chain. And we're continuing to work with Caerphilly. We're currently supporting them to undertake some soft market testing on the All Wales Food Framework. Caerphilly are the local authority that are developing the framework to supply food across the whole of Wales. And so we've been working really closely with them to go out to market, to do some early engagement, to find out really what the market could provide in terms of more solutions, sustainable solutions for sustainable packaging. So we've got a really positive response from our first market engagement exercise, which we've just received back on Friday. And so this will help us then really drive at the point of specification more sustainable outcomes in the tender, because we'll have the confidence of knowing what the market can provide and the capacity of it to provide more sustainable solutions. And the final piece of work, we've just started to do a spend review and prioritisation also with Caerphilly County Borough Council. So just on my last slide, I also mentioned that we had tools and resources. We have a web page where we have numerous examples of good practice, of good public procurement and more circular public procurement. So there's a number of different case studies from a number of different sectors. There's a number of furniture, which I believe may have been discussed earlier in this webinar series. But milk packaging, we have a more strategic overview looking at catering, but whole level spend reviews on whole procurement portfolios of organisations. And also we develop guidance. So one of our latest guidance that we published was on plastics procurement, which just really goes through how you can, if you're starting to procure, where do you start from? How do you look using the waste hierarchy, and also provide some model wording, some tender evaluation criteria, and how to monitor the contract going forward. So we have a number of other pieces of guidance that we're due to publish very soon. So they'll be available on our website also. So that's it for me today. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sinead. Fascinating. I think this this Wellbeing Act in Wales is so progressive. We hope that any regulators and policymakers that are sitting on these websites are listening to this approach to really valuing or defining value and prioritizing the social and environmental value above all things. I'm really curious. 3 million people in Wales, small but mighty jurisdiction, doing amazing things. 50 different support projects, and it sounds like you guys are a bit of the glue that binds them together. Is part of your role to sort of share the learnings? Is there a mandate to share the learnings between these projects?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're funded by Welsh Government, and it's really Welsh Government's intention that they want to really drive best practice throughout Wales. So absolutely, we work across sectors and categories as well. So if we have some learnings from one organisation, we most certainly share them across others. And that's as well where our guidance has come from. We produced the plastics guidance because lots of people were asking us the same questions.
Sure.
We're developing some sector guidance on construction. We're also working on some furniture work as well. So we've lots of different sector guidance, but we do work with similar organisations. And when you look at local authorities, their spend profiles will be very similar.
Yeah.
So absolutely, yeah, learnings are shared.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, part of what we want to be doing as an organization is bridging the learning between jurisdictions who are already implementing this with Canadian municipalities who are just starting on that journey. So we'll be contacting you often about how best to do that. And I also was caught by the project where or your role, I guess, as a support organization to kind of bind supply chains with waste management companies and procurers as well. I'm just wondering very specifically how when you're looking at things like alternatives and you're trying to engage supply chains, are they receptive? How do you work with them without, you're obviously signaling that you want something different from what they're supplying? So how do you wrestle with that?
Yeah, it's something I was thinking about actually. The one thing, I was asked this question recently, and the one thing that I must say, we have had a really positive engagement from the supply chain. And I think the supply chain are welcoming some direction. And a lot of the work that we're doing, particularly the example of NRW, the tree packaging, the product isn't currently available on the market. But by going out and doing this early market testing, you're sending that signal to market that, come on, guys, that's where we're going. And, we've found that the supply chain have welcomed it. Because with the Wellbeing Act, the public sector bodies, it places a duty on public sector bodies, but this has been cascaded out to their supply chain. And what we're starting to see in Wales is non-public sector bodies are kind of informally signing up to the Act, and signing up to the wellbeing objectives of the Act. And this is what, we're starting to see. So it really shows the power of public procurement.
Wow, that's fascinating. Excellent. Well, we're so pleased that you were able to join us today. And we look forward to the broader group discussion after Tor's presentation. So thank you very much, Sinead.
Okay. Thank you, John.
So now we're going to go a little bit north, or a lot north, I guess, in a European context, to welcome Mr. Tor Gusmel Christensen. I've been practicing that. He is coming to us by way of Bodø, Norway. So if you can, picture on a map Stockholm or Oslo, which I did over the weekend, in your mind's eye. And Bodø is about 1,200 kilometers north and about a 15-hour drive northeast, and right on the coast, a picturesque community. So we are very, very pleased to have you from far afield, and I'm certain you're the one heading towards the evening time frame. So thank you, Tor, for being with us. And why choose Bodø, a Norwegian town of 50,000 people? Well, they are one of the 7 projects that are part of the City Loops project, a collaboration between 7 European cities working to demonstrate a series of innovative tools and urban planning approaches, all aimed at closing the loop of urban material flows and increasing their regenerative capacity. Here to talk about the City Loops program in general, and in specific, the project that Tor is managing on behalf of Bodø, to talk to us about how well procurement fits into to that agenda. Tor is the demonstration manager who's overseeing specifically a transition, as I understand it, from a military airport into one that will become a civilian airport, and in doing so, driving circular results from that transition. So welcome, we're pleased to have you, and over to you, Tor.
Thank you, Joanne, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone, and good evening. It's evening in Norway, but I couldn't think of any possible better way to spend my evening than to talk about circular economy and what we're doing in Bodø. So I'm really glad that you want to listen to us and what we are doing in this small city in the high north. So let me see if I can share my screen. There we go, I think. I'm at my home office now, so if you hear some screaming outside here, it's just my 2-year-old fighting with his mother and protesting the fact that he's going to bed soon. So let's start. So you introduced pretty much the essence of City Loops. The City Loops is a research project. It's an international research project funded by Horizon 2020. That is sort of like a research fund. We're 7 cities in the EU that works towards the same goal, but we have different challenges. But our main goal is to increase circularity in society. To do this, we are developing different tools. We're using technology and innovation to work towards a more circular society. The project is built in 3 phases. The first phase is the research and development phase, which we're in now. The second phase is the demonstration phase, where we're materializing the research and development. And the third phase is the replication phase, the phase in which we want to, make available every tool that we're making to other countries and cities and organizations. But hopefully we can already now start to share some of the things that we're implementing in the municipality of Bodø, but also other places in this consortium and in EU. What we're doing in Bodø in specific is that we're demolishing the military airport, and we're building a new airport, a civilian airport on top of that. And we're also developing a new part of the city and the area that gets freed when these actions are done. In such a project, there is some opportunities that we can utilize in City Loops. We want to use this project to set the standard on how we want to demonstrate how structures and masses in these projects can be reused, and we want to use everything that is freed, everything that is from the military airport. We want to use that in building a new part of the city. There's so much I can tell you about this project, but procurement will be our focus today. Bodø municipality shall be a pioneer in climate and energy work, a smart, green, and future-oriented sustainable society. So we want to find out if we're headed this way. Is this just a way to greenify ourselves? Is this just a political commitment that we have, but we're not really practicing it? That is some of the questions we have asked ourselves. And of course, as Mervyn stated and everyone else knows, procurement is a powerful strategic instrument for a greener practice in society. In Norway, public procurement is about 17% of the GDP. So we obviously have there's obviously a lot of values generated from the public sector. And this creates an opportunity for making a difference on how the suppliers are acting, as you all know. So how do we improve? How do we know how good we're performing at the green procurement field? To identify that, we need to know how's the state now. And in order to identify how good we are, we have had some spend analysis. We have analyzed all our tenders, or many of them at least. We have tried to identify in which sector we should focus in order to get to have the biggest effect on how suppliers are acting. And we have also tried to compare ourselves with, a best practice. Having done this analysis, we've tried to identify where our focus should be. What shall we focus on in order to improve ourselves? And after we have established that, we have started working on improvement actions. And I will go through some of the things that we have done to improve ourselves. The data gathering was the first thing we did. And we have had some academic productions to support us. We had Rikswaterstaat collaborating with Mervyn to do our spend analysis. But we have also had some other people gathering data from us. We have had, for example, a master thesis, some students that wrote a master thesis about our tender history. So first recommendation is, if you want to get some data analyzed, you should communicate. You should communicate with or reach out to the universities, because chances are they're interested in looking into this data as part of their academic journey. So we had some students gathering data from us, analyzing the tenders that we have. First off, the spend analysis. The analysis that Rikswaterstaat made with Mervyn. There we just we went through our spend data. We also supplied. We also contributed with some qualitative data from some workshops that we arranged. Some of the findings that we found in the workshops is that we're somewhat pessimistic to our own performance. We know that we're not that good in circular and sustainable procurement. We also identified that there is an agreement in the municipality and in this development project that I was mentioning, that green procurement is important. So we know that we're not very good, and we know that we need. We know that we agree that it's important. I'm not going to go through every one of the findings in the spend data, but one finding is that 41% of the costs to the municipality of Bodø is related to construction and infrastructure. So this is obviously focus worthy. We do know that construction and infrastructure is a huge cost in public sector in general as well. But in Bodø, it's 41%. We have also had an analysis done on the spend data that suggests where our focus can be. You can look at this graph. These bars is the sum of risk, scope, and influence. The risk is the risk of existing activity, the risk of not utilizing the potential that we have, and the risk of reputation. The scope is the improvement potential in these different segments. The influence is the ability to influence the vendor. So you can see on the graph there that construction is we are confirming that construction and materials is something that is to be focused on. We can also see that clothing and food is pretty important segments. So let's go to the tender review. We had someone look through our tenders and to evaluate if we're weighing environmental factors enough in these tenders. The baseline that they used was best practice identified by the EU. So we're basically comparing the municipality of Bodø's tender history with a best practice. We found out that we show environmental responsibility only to a certain degree, but we do not practice green public procurement enough. And why is that? Well, the findings in these analyses was that the award criteria didn't make any difference, nearly any at least. Only 24% of the award criteria in the tenders had formulated demands to environmental factors. So, and to compare with the EU, it is 52%. And where the demands were formulated, the demands wasn't nuanced enough. There was, for example, demands to product and wrapping, but transportation, for example, was not considered. So that is an interesting finding. But we did find out that we're good at demanding a profile, an environmental profile with our suppliers, and that in 76% of the tenders we included environmental factors in the qualification requirements, and we're better in EU at that point. However, the demands that we made could be more nuanced, as the most of the requirements was just requirement to an environmental management system. We do not lack knowledge about the implementation of environmental responsibility in the award criteria, and there is indeed a difference between political guidelines and green procurement in practice. This is new information for us, but this creates for us a baseline. This gives us an opportunity to measure improvements, because now we know where we are, and now we can do these actions or these organizational changes needed to be better, and then we can compare the new way of practicing in a year, for example, with the data that we have on how things are going now. From Rikswaterstaat and from these students, we have gotten some recommendations. Early market involvement, involve the suppliers early when you have a project. do not only set qualification requirements, also focus on award criteria. Do have precise environmental requirements. Learn from the good ones, green terminology. Make sure to increase the knowledge and the importance of green procurement in the whole organization, and make sure to have a dedicated employee to the contract follow-up. When you have a contract with the supplier, it's important that you also follow the supplier up, making sure that the supplier acts as agreed upon. Other recommendations: annual evaluation of consumption and routines, workshops, categorical requirements. Instead of making specific requirements on every single one of the suppliers, maybe you can make categorical requirements that you have sort of like a set with demands when procuring textiles, for example. And what do we do with all this information that we have gathered, this data that we have gathered, and this recommendations that we have gotten? Well, we make sure to permeate it to the whole organization, but also to the decision makers, including the decision makers, and communicating the results and importance, making people aware of these findings and making people aware that we have so much improvement potential. We also do know that if we're more sustainable, and if we have data that can prove that we're getting more sustainable, we can get more funding, because that's the policy in Norway, at least. If we in this new airport project can show that we're sustainable and environmental friendly, chances are that we will get more funding for this project. And this underlines really the power of green procurement. We have also gathered this information and more, and made some applications to externally financiers that has helped us in finance a new employee that will solely work with following up vendors. Share the ambition in the whole organization. So I'm soon finished now. I just want to show you two examples on how we are implementing green procurement. So when we started to plan how the new city would look, how the new part of the city would look, we needed to have some expertise from city planners and private architects. So we put out a tender on that. We want a suggestion to the new city concept. We had some qualification criteria. 3 of these suppliers were chosen and met these criteria. We communicated to them early that we want this new city concept to, we want to move as high up in the hierarchy that you see on the left side in the suggestion to the new city. So we want to have really focus on the prevention of waste and the reuse of materials and masses there. So we let them work with our ambitions as a base, and we let them have a public presentation on how the new city concept would look. And it was really nice to see that they had such a focus on circularity, just because we had an early market involvement to them on this field. Implementation, this is a concrete example on how we in Norway can implement sustainable factors in our tenders. This is a tool, and you can, if you have a project, a construction project, for example, you can click on construction. Let's say it's a new building. Let's say it's a design project. Let's move on. Let's choose the factors that we think is important. That's all of them. This is the level of complication on the tender. I'm just gonna click on some random values here just to show you how it works. Next step, download that criteria. And boom, we have a criteria that we can attach to our tenders. So this is, I think this is a really good example on how you can actually operationally implement circular procurement in tenders. Yeah, so summary step by step: identify relevant data, gather data, draw conclusions, use tools, the materials, the ambitions. I do not have time to talk more about city loops, but maybe next time I will talk about business models and the innovation and technological tool that we're building in city loops. Thank you so much for letting me speak.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Tor. Fascinating. That criteria wizard is something else. And I'll ask a question there first. Can you talk about how that was built? Is it a partnership with the university? Were your procurement specialists involved? Did you have your vendors involved in creating the criteria that helps to design it?
The criteria wizard is actually made from a governmental institution called the DFE. So we did not build that, but we're working with implementing that in our organization and making sure that everyone that the purchasing department are utilizing such tools as this one. Furthermore, one of the organizational things that we're working on is that while every project manager and every department manager can just buy anything they want without having any control on the environmental factors, that's not, I think, an ideal way of doing that, ensuring these demands that we have committed ourselves to.
Right. So that's the next step, I suppose, to try to put some controls on that, which you've described as well. And I just want to make the point, because we have several people that are part of our participants today that come from smaller to mid-sized municipalities. I mean, 50,000 people is not huge. It's not a big, it's a medium-sized municipality in our context in any case. Was there enough buying power? Did you feel that even though it's a smaller municipality, smaller buying power, was it difficult to get the vendors and suppliers to get engaged and deliver on the kinds of criteria you were looking for?
Not now, because the city development project that I was telling you about, I think it's the biggest construction project in Norway now. Given the fact that there's so many activities, there's the demolishing of a huge airport, there's the building of a huge airport, there's the demolishing of a civilian airport, and there's the city development project. So there's billions of kroner involved there. So I think many of both national and regional companies want to be with us in that journey and really wants to adapt to our demands.
That makes sense. That's excellent. Well, I want to thank you again for sharing the information about City Loops and the amazing project that you have in front of you, that you're managing, and all that you've been able to achieve in the context of Buda to date. I'm going to move to our last speaker, and then we're hopefully going to have a bit of time for some group questions. So for those of you, before we get into Marcos's presentation, bring us back to home. If you have to leave right at 1 o'clock, we are obviously going to go over time. If you have to leave right at 1 o'clock, just know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted, and we will be sending out the link to all of you who have joined us today. But we hope that you can stay past 1 o'clock, because we all know that the conversation is always the richest part. So we've been all over the globe to date, and now we're going to bring it right back home with Marcos Alejandro Badra. So he currently is living in the city of Richmond on the west coast of BC, but hails originally from Argentina and Brazil. So we are not done with our world tour, but we certainly know that circular economy and its adaptation is still very much in its infancy in a Canadian context, and not nearly as advanced as we've heard from those that have come to us from Europe. But that doesn't mean that we're not trying to blaze new trails here, and we're pleased to be able to partner with Marcos over this past couple of years and to advance his interest in using procurement to do so. And we've had the privilege of working with Marcos not only in terms of the Circular Procurement Summit, but then we actually brought some circular procurement workshops to him and his team internally at the City of Richmond, and then very productive conversations with a workshop with his vendors and suppliers as well. So he's a sustainability and project management specialist with experience in South America, Europe, and North America. And he's bringing all of that international knowledge to the City of Richmond. They are very, very lucky to have him. He is passionate in what he does and is certainly taking a lead role in incorporating circular procurement requirements throughout his organization as well. So Marcus is certainly a true champion of circular economy, and he'll be able to talk a little bit about the starting of his journey with the City of Richmond and where he plans to take it. Please welcome Marcos.
Thank you, Joanne, for the kind presentation. Let me share the screen. Okay. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for inviting me to be here today and to be able to share what we are doing at the City of Richmond. To complete the idea, I am not trying to repeat everything that was shared before. It was amazing, full and rich knowledge. My idea today is try to share the practical way that we applied everything in the City of Richmond in our journey. The City of Richmond has a tradition to innovate in environmental area. Environmental purchasing is not new for the City of Richmond. The first guide and policy was implemented around 2000, and Council was approving that and improving that policy through the last 20 years. And in 2015, Council integrate sustainable criteria inside the procurement policy, and the environmental impact was mapped in our policy. Last year, in 2019, Council identified the opportunity to go further in how the city is working with procurement, and they decide to include circular economy. Why we started in procurement and circular economy in procurement. That's a common document that is shared by the National Zero Waste Council in Canada and other organizations about the power of public procurement and opportunities that that represented for Canada. Around the average is 50% of the gross domestic product in Canada is spent by public procurement. And the city is spending around $130 million per year. In 2018 was that number in public procurement. Our council approved the work plan that we developed to integrate circular criteria in our policy, procurement policy. And the work plan was divided in three big steps. The first step was to define and framework for City of Richmond around circular economy. The second step was an internal or internal engagement with all the stakeholders. Mervyn explained really well all the meaning of the internal engagement process and stakeholders. And the third step, and we work together with the Recycling Council of Ontario in this step was the engagement with the external stakeholders. That is basically how all the project was developed in 2 years to develop our framework and engagement and update our policy with all the criteria, the new criteria or circular criteria. Something important that we understand in the first step to define the framework was to understand how the procurement is not just improving circularity in city economy, but also how that is connected with previous or current policies and projects and programs around sustainability and council's goal. We grouped everything in 4 big drivers or key ideas about zero carbon, zero waste, ecosystem resilience, and business mobilization. And also identify the key programs and policies that are connected with the idea or can take advantage to the criteria that we plan to incorporate inside the public procurement, the procurement policy. Something important that also we understand, and we took that graphic from Mervyn and other leading cities in Europe, identify the environment that the city of Richmond is working on the market, and identify the key stakeholders internally and externally to increase collaboration during the complete process. That is the basic way that we work to engage internally and internal and external stakeholders. We have our council referral, and after that, we created an internal working group that represents all city departments and areas. We engage in different methodologies, interviews, face-to-face interviews, focus groups, workshops, training, and different activities to engage all staff in all the levels, from the senior managers until operational teams, to understand current knowledge, perception, feelings, opportunities, barriers, culture, and everything around the concept of circular economy. And from them, we identify the key stakeholders that we should include internally and externally. We run interviews, internal interviews, and also external interviews, and we engage also conversations with the leading cities in Canada and also in the United States and in the European Union. And from all that amazing amount of information that we received, we analyze and work on that information. Finally, we created focus groups, workshops to work internally with key stakeholders. And the result was the external workshop with the vendors and suppliers, everyone together, and staff, city staff, in one room to speak about circular economy and learn with each other. The internal engagement process has the goal to engage everyone to share their own perceptions and ideas around the circular economy. We realize that commonly, internally and externally, people is confusing circular economy with recycling process. And that was one of the biggest learning that we have in the process. We create awareness about our projects, ambitions, and in council intentions. We train people and we share, we co-create the map of circular economy procurement initiatives at the City of Richmond, and identify together with staff how we can implement that and how we can be successful in that implementation. For the internal workshop, we define what is the meaning of circular economy for the City of Richmond. What is our definition, what's our vision for circular economy? We create our infographic, and also everyone provide inputs, and our vision to for City of Richmond circular economy. And the definition or the vision for the circular economy is to maximize the value of resources by design through responsible consumption, minimizing waste, and reimagine how resources flow in sustainable, equitable, low carbon economy. From there, we identify or divide the sectors of city procurement in 5 big groups: construction infrastructure, fleet service, IT, and facilities maintenance and operation. That makes sense for the City of Richmond reality and how departments and organization, the complete organization is organized. And we identify the key section or the key areas to keep focus in each of them. Also from the internal workshop, we identify the principles and criteria that the city needs to follow or achieve to in the direction of our vision. And that is a result that we also prepare to share with external stakeholders. From our interviews coming from the city of leading cities, the city of Richmond also summarize this graphic to understand the key learning that we have that makes sense for our reality and how we can use this experience that cities that started before than us, we can capitalize and use that and replicate that experience and tools and information in our reality. The external workshop was also the similar idea of the internal workshop was create awareness, educate, and also unify vision about the concept of circular economy, but also open to receive feedback and inputs and new ideas and comments and also critics from our work, and identify opportunity with all stakeholders and how we can apply, implement, and the roadmap for the circular criteria into the procurement policy. And during the workshop, we identified key work on key activities or projects that the city already has implemented, and with the stakeholders that were in that room as well. And just will be in the presentation after, you can go deeper, but we share key activities from each of the service, the water meter program, how we are reusing material for our dikes. The city of Richmond is an island, and we are trying to keep the island dry. And how we are working with and reusing materials, how we can use it, reclaiming material to keep our dikes or update the dikes. Also projects about the truck solar panel project to reduce fossil fuels consumption and increase and provide energy, solar energy for the tools that staff is working outside. The new kind of contract that we have with Xerox to provide printing service. Also, the update of the street light system in the city and how that is impacting in our in the result that we have with that activity. And from the external workshop, we understand the readiness or the external readiness or market readiness that we have in the city. And that is the graphic. We divide readiness in 3 big groups: in capacity, commitment, and cultural. You can see in the graphic quickly that cultural and commitment are the lower or the smaller readiness that we have right now in the city. For some reason, we are working, including a roadmap, educational and awareness process to work with our stakeholders. The key barriers that we identify in the process is the mindset that everything is more expensive, circularity is more expensive, even that we prove after in the work, in the projects, the pilot projects that we are working, that is not always true. The mindset that low virgin material, the cost of the virgin material is really low in comparison with the reclaimed material. The lower cases that we have, or the low of cases of pilot projects that we have locally here to compare results, the city with the region reality. The low communication or no communication between different stakeholders. And finally, the limiting budgets funding was an assumption as a limitation of barrier from the stakeholders. During the workshop, we worked on that, and after the workshop until now, during the COVID area, we started to implement and map different procurement activities during these last months to identify how the barriers are appearing in that specific procurement. And we are ready now to present to Council all the recommendations to update the policies, the tools, the principles, and everything that we need to the next step to implement the criteria, circular criteria in our procurement activities.
Okay, thank you so much, Marcus. That was excellent. You guys have done so much work in such a short period of time. And before we open it up to all of the speakers for some questions, just specifically to the work in Richmond, interesting that it seemed like you started with council to have the leadership, have the council itself actually bless this work. How important was that to being able to pull together all of the departments around this strategy?
That was really important because our council, including the strategy goals, circular economy goals. Yeah. And after that, they initiate the activity to start through the procurement policies. And comparing our work with another leading cities, we understood that that is a critical thing. Because it's coming from the high direction, and that is unifying the vision and putting everyone in the same direction and on the same commitment. And that was really good to create a common mindset to work together in a common direction internally and also externally as well. Sure.
And I guess with that direction, then it's interesting that it's coming full circle and you're bringing all your findings from your case studies right back to council to get them blessed and to continue to forge forward. Interesting process for sure. And I have to say, being part of the workshop to engage vendors, I mean, I was blown away at how much anticipation and willingness all of your vendors across all of your sectors were waiting for direction for you to just tell us the criteria, just tell us what you want, give us the outcome you're driving, and we'll deliver it for you. It was very it was remarkable to me how willing they really were in a really a small local context. So excellent. Okay, I'll ask all the speakers to open up their videos as well as their to unmute so that we can get all of you going. We do have some questions that are starting to come in. So just for everybody's sake, I'm going to grab another 10 minutes of everybody's time. I know that that we're all webinared to death, but very rarely do we get such a cross section of fascinating and really highly educated speakers and practitioners, quite frankly, which is really what we're looking for from across the globe. So I am going to steal more time. Maybe you can talk a little bit about this whole idea of providing a or how important it is to provide a or a pre-competitive environment where suppliers and vendors can feel safe. I mean, it's very odd, or it has been my experience, that, you know, procurement and finance and legal and sustainability functions of local governments, they don't work with vendors unless it's a very rigid process for procurement. Typically, you write your procurement in the cloak of darkness, you send it out, and you don't talk to vendors and suppliers until such time as you receive the bids back. And then there's this sort of you know, very private process to score and to share criteria and results. But we really have to park that old practice as it relates to vendor engagement. So maybe with that in mind, you know, maybe you could talk a little bit about ensuring and encouraging, and really practically, how do you reverse that process? Maybe Mervyn, we could start with you.
I was going to bounce it over to Sinead, actually, because I think one of the beautiful examples we have is, you know, these voluntary agreements, which various different governments, certainly in Europe and UK in particular, has been one government that has relied very strongly on that pre-competitive environment through voluntary agreement, working with the supply chains, because as you know yourself, Joanne, from inside Canada, it's there's got to be something in it for both sides. If you try and have that them and us mentality all the time, then you're going to come to the negotiating table, you're going to come to the point of awarding a contract where you're looking to squeeze each an opposite people, and you never get the best outcome. So working stepwise backwards from that to a pre-competitive environment is absolutely crucial. It's easy for me to say that, but actually it's the practical ways of how you can do that. And as I say, you know, voluntary agreements like the UK government and many governments around the world have now done in terms of the Plastic Pact, you know, the New Plastics Economy with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. You know, those are really good examples, but also, as Sinead said, you know, with the food waste program, as well as the plastics packaging reduction program, you know, and also in textiles as well. So I'll pass over to Sinead because she's the expert there.
Please, yes.
Yeah, I think, you know, Mervyn has definitely hit the nail on the head from our experience in RAP. We have a number of voluntary agreements across different sectors, and personally I work very closely on one of the voluntary agreements on textile sector, and I can say from experience that, you know, it's been very successful. And I think, again, even something that we found with dealing with suppliers on our public sector procurement programme in Wales, I think the sector is looking for direction, and they're happy to be able to come together because everybody is trying to achieve the same aim. And, you know, I think the organisations that are coming together through these voluntary agreements in particular, you know, tend to be the more progressive organisations, and they're keen to bring the other organisations along with them, because you get this shift change unless you have the majority of the sector brought together collaboratively. So yeah, just to reiterate what Mervyn has said, you know, I completely agree that, you know, the voluntary approach has been very successful for us here in the UK and many other places around the world.
Yeah, and I think picking up on something Marco said about, you know, turning, I guess, educating internal and external, that the circular economy is much, much more than recycling. Because I think, you know, we're still, because it's so, we're still learning about what the, you know, the business models that can deliver on a circular economy more broadly. The mind goes right to what we know, which is really recycling is the most familiar. But when you start to learn about the other business models, you know, it's really provides such a platform for innovation for business. You know, if it's a service that, instead of a product, you know, then really the wheels come right off the traditional business models. So maybe Marcos and Tor, you know, you guys are at the front lines trying to, you know, push your internal stakeholders and all your stakeholders to have a broadened experience about what the circular economy is. Maybe you can talk about what your role is in making that happen. I
think it's a really important point that you're raising, the fact that recycling is not the only element in circular economy. Some of the things that we're doing while, you know, involving these vendors and these suppliers is to convince them that these structures on the demonstration project at which we're working, these structures doesn't necessarily has to be crushed and demolished. They can be repurposed. They can come in these city planning suggestions that I was telling you about. They can, rather than just make a suggestion on how the mass is treated and how it's going through a circle, they can just start with the top of the hierarchy, that is waste reduction, and try to repurpose things rather than just recycling them. And if things has to be demolished, because there is some structures that has to be demolished in order for us to build a new airport and a new city. We're trying to get more knowledge and to make available more knowledge regarding selective demolition, on how to demolish certain structures in components that can be reused again. For example, the hangars that I was telling you about, the flight hangars. Maybe if we have to demolish them, maybe we can just share them in, split them in slices, making elements that can be as foundations to bridges, for example. that is circular economy.
Interesting. That's great. Selective demolition. That's not something I don't think the construction, renovation, demolition industry hears very often. So, you know, it's obviously indicative of where we hope to go. Marcos, anything to add from you in terms of your point?
Yes, we identified in the city of Richmond that the city is not doesn't have the power to change the market or to rule the market about how producers, suppliers need to work, develop products. But we recognize that we have the leadership to lead by our procurements or own projects from the beginning to design, to lead the market and influence them to move toward the circular economy direction. And an amazing example I can provide, 2-3 weeks ago, we paved a complete road, almost 1 kilometer of reclaimed asphalt pavement. That was a project in partnership with the National Zero Waste Council. We identified 2 years ago that the market was against the idea to reuse asphalt. And we started to work with the market, putting everyone in the same room, all the stakeholders from vendors, suppliers, contractors, consultants, associations. And our role was to ask the questions. What about that? Why we can do that? Or how we can achieve that result? And we allow everyone to speak from their own experience and facilitating the conversation between them. The result was, after 2 years, we have the pilot project with all the stakeholders involved. Everyone is participating in that, and everyone is looking for the result, the success of the project. And that is, from us, the best example of how we can work through toward the circular economy with everyone together. And our role is lead and facilitate the conversation and thinking the correct question to ask them.
And then just for clarity, did you have that vendor already selected and then you worked with them to reuse, or did you select the vendor based on your desire to ensure that you reclaim the asphalt?
We are going a little bit back. It's an idea that we learn reading materials coming from Europe, the pre-competitive space. Yep. We put all the vendors that we have in the lower mainland in the same room, and we share the idea with them. They can go after the market and have the healthy competition between them. But we have the problem. Citizens are not using, or clients are not using RAP, reclaimed asphalt payment, in the mixed design, because they are not confident about that. We say, okay, why that, and how we can change that reality. And we put all of them at the same level, and that is interesting how they, in the pre-competitive space, collaborate with each other to achieve that result. And that was really, really good. Even that one of them just was responsible to pay, everyone and other companies are aware about the result and are following the project closely. And we are sharing the result with all of them as well.
Perfect. Okay, it's 20 after 1, so we've stolen 20 minutes of everyone's time that stayed with us. First and foremost, I just want to thank, if you can hear a virtual applause, it's very, very loud in my ears. I'm so thrilled that you were all able to join us from parts of the world, and we very much look forward to expanding our relationship. This is just the start of things, and we want to continue to work with you. So we're very pleased to have this introduction to most of you, and to regain a connection to Marcos and of course Mervyn. So you'll hear from us more than you probably want to. So thanks very much. To those of you who have joined us today, if you're interested in the work that we're doing and you'd like to become a member of the organization, please do email us after the fact or after the webinar, or when we send out the link that to the recording of today's webinar, to let you know that we are actually going to be launching circularprocurement.ca very, very soon, which is an online open source resource for advancing circular procurement and of course the circular economy in Canada. And we have a special real estate dedicated to posting all of the good works of Tor, Sinead, and of course Mervyn and Marcos on the website, and we'll be using this as a starting point to grow an arsenal of resources and tools to helping implementation on this website, and so it'll be something that we hope that you'll continue to utilize as you want to see move forward. For those of you who are interested, we are going to be hosting virtual workshops. We have been doing a lot of in-person workshops prior to COVID, and of course have now pivoted to offer them online. And if you're interested in having your organization or your vendors and suppliers involved in a circular procurement workshop, we'd be pleased to chat with you about that. And we are capable of hosting those online. And then last but not least, the fourth and final webinar of our series, Measuring Success, which is scheduled for Monday, December 14th at the same time. And we'll be sending out, of course, reminders to you in the coming days as we populate that particular webinar. So to all of you, thank you so much for joining. To our speakers, please stay safe and stay in touch. And we'll see everybody on the 14th. Take good care.
Thanks, Joanne. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.